The families obviously have gone through a very long and very gruelling criminal investigation and trial process. But they want a statutory inquiry, they want an effective inquiry, and most of all, they want a thorough inquiry that gets the answers. And, I don't necessarily accept that that would necessarily take longer, but if it does, then it will be worth it, providing that any recommendations are ultimately implemented, of course.
Now, convicted murderers will now be made to attend their sentencing, including by force if necessary. That's under new laws from the Ministry of Justice. It follows several high-profile offenders who have refused to appear, including the killer of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell and, last week, Lucy Letby. We've also had news in the last hour about the inquiry into Lucy Letby's crimes. The government have upgraded it from an independent to a statutory inquiry, meaning greater powers to compel witnesses to give evidence. It followed criticism from families of the victims that the original framework didn't go far enough. Here's Health Secretary Steve Barclay speaking earlier.
Now, in most non-statutory inquiries, the chairs of those inquiries have said they haven't had difficulties having people come forward with evidence. But having discussed it with the families, their preference was to have the inquiry on a statutory footing in order to have those stronger powers of compulsion. And when I announced that we would have an independent inquiry, I was very clear that we would shape that inquiry around the wishes of the families. My priority is to ensure that the families get the answers they deserve, that people are held to account where they need to be.
That was Steve Barclay speaking earlier. Let's speak to Richard Scorer now, Head of Abuse Law and Public Inquiries at Slater Gordon Solicitors. He's representing two of the families of the victims of Lucy Letby. Thanks for being with us this evening, Richard. Appreciate it. Your reaction, first of all, to the announcement that this will be a statutory inquiry, a full inquiry?
Well, I think it's the right decision. It's a good decision. It's the decision that families wanted. And I've no doubt that the decisive factor in this actually was the meeting that the families had with the Health Secretary yesterday. And I know that certainly my clients and others, I'm sure as well, made the point very forcefully that a statutory inquiry is really important here so that we can have an effective inquiry. And the Health Secretary has responded with this decision today, and I think it's the right decision.
Many people argue that it won't be an effective inquiry if it takes too long. There's a danger that some of the recommendations given could be out of date, or that some of the evidence will no longer be relevant so many years down the line. How long would you expect it to take, and how would you respond to the criticism that actually this isn't appropriate? It'll just simply take too long?
Well, I don't know how long it will take, and we'll have to have discussions over the coming weeks and months around the shape of the inquiry and how it goes about its work. But I would make the point, and actually this point was made by Jack Straw, the former Labour Justice Secretary, when this issue came up the other day, that in fact when you look back through the history of inquiries, it's not right to say that non-statutory inquiries are necessarily faster. Various inquiries have had various different track records on this, and it's not necessarily related to whether they're statutory or non-statutory. Obviously, we want the inquiry to conclude its work as quickly as it can, but not at the expense of doing a thorough job. The most important thing is to do a thorough job, and then to ensure that recommendations are actually implemented. And that's another issue, that we don't have a great track record in this country of actually implementing the recommendations from public inquiries. So that needs to change as well.
Yeah, the Inquiries Act, I think it is, states that recommendations given don't have to be followed up. They don't have to be adhered to. And that would certainly be one failing with the inquiries system. I mean, can Steve Barclay, do the government have any power to say, right, we want this set up and underway within, let's say, 3 months, and we want this done within 2 years? Can there be any way of compelling a time frame for both setting it up and for concluding it?
I think that's very much in the hands of the government. I mean, it's set up by them. They have to initiate the work to get it underway.
Is that something that you'd like to see?
I'd absolutely like to see it, and I think the timescales you've mentioned are actually eminently achievable. From my experience of various public inquiries, I think that's doable, but it will require effort, and it will require expedition and initiative to get it moving.
For those grieving families, Richard, and I know that you are looking after some of them, if they were to hear that it could take, let's say, 3 years to get full conclusions in. That will feel like an awful long time for those families. Will that feel like too long a time? I'm just kind of weighing up in my head here, actually, the fact that they've been waiting a long time for justice already, but also the fact that they are grieving and they desperately, having seen some justice for Lucy Letby, they also want to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And the point is, it could take 3 years to get to a point where recommendations are given so that this might not happen again.
Well, I don't think we should approach this inquiry, and I don't think the government should approach this inquiry on the footing that it has to take many, many, many years. It needs to be set up expeditiously. It needs to get its work underway expeditiously and work as quickly as it can without sacrificing thoroughness. I think that's the really important thing. And the families obviously have gone through a very long and very gruelling criminal investigation and trial process. But they want a statutory inquiry, they want an effective inquiry, and most of all, they want a thorough inquiry that gets the answers. And, I don't necessarily accept that would necessarily take longer, but if it does, then it will be worth it, providing that any recommendations are ultimately implemented, of course.
Steve Barclay's said that an announcement as to who will chair the inquiry will be made in the coming days. We know it's going to be a judge. What do we need to see in terms of the appointment of that judge? Who will instill confidence in the families or from the families?
Well, obviously, once we know who that is, we will want to have the opportunity with the families to meet with whoever is appointed to that role to discuss the future of the inquiry. I hope it's an experienced judge. I think that it needs to be a judge who is capable of, organising a large-scale effort and managing a large-scale effort through to conclusion. And many judges will have those skills, not all do. But so selecting the right individual is going to be important. I do think it's right that it's a judge. I mean, this is one of the most serious cases in the history of the NHS, and I do think it needs a judge-led inquiry.
And does it need to be someone ideally with experience in healthcare inquiries? They can be complex, that, usually not one person is culpable. There are multiple interpretations often. Health inquiries can be complex, often are complex. Does it need to be someone who ideally has experience in them?
I think you're certainly going to need somebody in this type of inquiry who has clinical knowledge and can readily understand clinical issues, maybe experience that they've gained through legal practice cases that they've done, experience that they've gained on the bench. But there's got to be that basis of experience for it. I think that's going to be important. Yeah,
and have the families given you any reaction this evening at all to this news, Richard?
I think they're very pleased. That they certainly are. This is what they wanted. It's what they made very clear to Steve Barclay that they wanted when they met with him yesterday. And, the decision is the right one. And we need to now move forward from here to get the inquiry in place as quickly as possible.
Richard, hugely appreciate you speaking to us. Thank you. Richard Scorer, who is Head of Abuse Law and Public Inquiries at Slater Gordon Solicitors. He's representing two of the families who are families of the victims of Lucy Letby.